Good evening, ghoulies and ghosties and long-leggedy beasties. This is Alex, coming at you from the underworld, and welcome back to another episode of... In this episode, I'm doing something that I've never done before, because instead of just having one guest, I actually have two. So I think this is going to be a lot of fun, because not only do I have my best friend Connie returning, but my husband Kerry is returning as well. And in a perfect world, we would include our online friends that we read this with, which is Gina and Bryce, but unfortunately we don't live anywhere near them. But just know that we wish you were here with us. Now, with the Final Girl Support Group, this is a book that I'm really excited to review because Connie, Kerry, and I had heard about it in its early stages, and upon us hearing about it, we had vowed to read it together. Then, as time ticked closer, we discovered that Gina and Bryce were also anticipating reading this. So because of that, I created my first big readers group, and we all just had a great time together discussing character, plot, theme, and the whole whodunit aspect. And we had a lot of fun going beyond that as well, because we actually created like Spotify playlists for the characters and book. So it was just a great time in general. But without me rambling on anymore, let's welcome back Kerry and Connie.
Thank you for having me back. I'm so excited to be back and so excited to dive into the Final Girl Support Group. I have always been such a big fan of slasher films, so this book was really up my alley. Really up my alley. Everything's pretty much the same with me. Work, get my nephew back into the school routine. I got my fall decorations up, so I'm happy that this is my favorite time of the year. I just love it. So that's pretty much what's new with me.
Yeah, and everything's pretty much the same with me as well. I got a great new job that I start on Monday, so I'm really excited about that. I just finished reading Circe by Madeline Miller and Ariadne by Jennifer Saint and Good Omens by Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett. And I just started reading The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller, and it's fantastic. So that's pretty much it for me.
Awesome, awesome. Well, before we get started, we would just like to say thank you to Gina and Bryce for reading this with us. We had a lot of really great discussions with y'all in regards to character and theme, and it just allowed us to have a good bonding experience and to geek out. So, Bryce and Gina, if you're watching this, we hope you enjoy the review, but without further ado, let's see who's killing off the final girls. The Final Girls Support Group by Grady Hendrix introduces Lynette Tarkington, who had become a final girl after she had survived her loved ones being slaughtered by a maniac who had been dressed in a Santa outfit. Then, one Christmas after that, his brother returned to finish the job, but luckily he was not able to kill her. Which, because of her surviving these tragedies, Lynette has become hyper aware, and she makes it a point to exercise every day, keep her hair cut short, and to never wear loose fitting clothes. And even though she does find comfort in her apartment that she had transformed over into a safety bunker, she also finds comfort in attending group sessions that are intended for final girls.
After becoming acquainted with Lynette, we learned the Final Girl Support Group consists of 5 other women who have also survived similar ordeals. While the group has been meeting for the last 16 years under the supervision of the group creator Dr. Carol Elliott, unbeknownst to them, she has secretly been considering ending the group just because it's just not serving a purpose anymore. While in their current session, while Lynette has been coming to group religiously and has become used to the routine, she is horrified when she discovers that final girl Danny has decided to quit coming to group.
Then, before Lynette has time to process the news, Final Girl Marilyn tells everyone that she just received a gut-wrenching text message that revealed the group's role model Adrian had just been found murdered. At first, the group believes that this is an isolated incident, but Lynette soon discovers that there's a new slasher on the loose and they're killing final girls. With the suspect list lengthening, and any final girl could be the next victim, it's up to Lynette to unmask the nemesis and break the cycle of violence.
The term final girl was coined by film professor Carol J. Clover in her 1992 book, Men, Women, and Chainsaws, Gender in a Modern Horror Film, and it refers to the last girl standing at the end of a horror movie, especially if that movie is a slasher. The Final Girl Support Group by Grady Hendrix was published 2021, and it received rave reviews from Publishers Weekly, Charlene Harris, Stephen Graham Jones, and many more. In a Rolling Stone interview, Hendrix explained he avoided any Final Girl related entertainment because he didn't want to be influenced by someone else's idea, which included avoiding the 2018 Halloween reboot until after he turned in his manuscript. And while the Final Girl Support Group shows how Final Girls always have a sequel, unfortunately, Hendrix said there won't be a sequel to this novel.
During an interview conducted by Jonathan Haupt with the Southern Review of Books, Hendrix explained the manuscript of the Final Girl Support Group had been on his hard drive for years, and during 2020, while he cared for his sick mother, he rewrote the third part of his manuscript. And this is when he came to realize that Final Girls survive not because they're stronger or faster or better equipped to deal with tragedy. They survive because they just don't quit. Hendrix added that writing this book and doing revisions during the pandemic was almost a coping process, and people seemed to be responding to that element of the story.
Fun facts!
Here's a few things you might not know about how Grady Hendrix created his characters.
Character-wise, when interviewed with the Memphis Commercial Appeal, Hendrix explained he gained inspiration from his older sisters who have all come to his rescue at one point or the other, and that Final Girls definitely have that big sister vibe. Then he noted how his wife is a chef with her own restaurant, and the support she received from other female chefs was an influence on this book. Hendrix explained upon writing the Final Girl Support Group, he wanted to rectify some horror movie oversights, like how there had never been a black Final Girl, and how it was likely that some Final Girl became wheelchair-bound due to a spinal injury. He added if someone had been using his dreams to try to murder him, he would also rely on pills and alcohol. Also, he considered that getting chased by a family of redneck cannibals in Texas becomes more interesting if the women they're trying to kill are Latina. In an interview conducted by Daryl Maxwell with the LAPL blog, Hendrix revealed that when the final girl of Friday the 13th died at the beginning of its sequel, the casual cruelty of that blew his mind, as she had seen all of her friends die and survived, but she still couldn't let down her guard. Years later, he saw Dream Warriors, and he was surprised to see Nancy show up to lead a group therapy session. This was when he considered what would happen if all Final Girls came together to help each other. Now that we have that covered, it's time to move on to the spoilers segment, which, if you haven't read this before, we're about to reveal some things that could ruin the experience for you. So if you would like to skip this moment, just scroll down to the comments and you'll see that I have a comment pinned at the top with a timestamp in it. If you click that timestamp, it will direct you away from the spoilers and bring you to the thoughts section. Now, you only have 17 seconds to do this, so...
Ready, set, go!
Now that everyone's had the opportunity to click away, we would like to talk about a few of our favorite moments.
I would like to talk about Michelle's breakout scene. Now, what's happened here is Lynette and the gang decided to go check on Michelle since Danny has been arrested. Now, when they get there, Michelle is not doing good. She is not doing good, and she really wants to pass away at home around the flowers and see the flowers that Danny planted. Now, Lynette, being a hyper-vigilant person that she is and freaking out being in the hospital, she's like, this is not good. She convinces Marilyn and Heather that they need to get Michelle out. After some run-ins with the South, they make a break for it. Now, once they get in the car, these little geniuses realize they do not know where the ranch is. Now, poor Michelle's getting so close to death, she ends up going on herself. So they pull over and get her cleaned back up, trying to help her keep some dignity. After they get on the road, they realize that Michelle does not have any time left. She is deteriorating fast. So they pull over at a park by the ocean so she can see something pretty. And as Michelle passes away, she's holding Marilyn and Lynette's hand and says, "Such good friends." This was such a tearjerker moment. I mean, this was like fried green tomatoes level moving. And I really just loved how Marilyn took control here and how compassionate and loving she was with Michelle. And I loved how she demanded that if Michelle asked, yes, she was at that ranch. And yes, if she asked if Danny was present. It really just showed she just had such a good heart.
One of my favorite moments was when we saw exactly how batshit insane Chrissy was. Which this comes about because Lynette and Stephanie eventually wind up at Chrissy's ranch. And while Stephanie stays behind in their car, Lynette goes to the ranch where she is abducted by Chrissy's homicidal boyfriend who drags her inside the house. Now, we already understand that Chrissy is an advocate for the monsters, which this is really messed up because Chrissy is a final girl. But this is when we see exactly how insane Chrissy really is. Because after Chrissy and Lynette talk about the current situation, Chrissy starts to rant on and on about how she's so happy that Lynette is finally going to become a real final girl. Like, it's to the point where she clutches her pearls and just gushes about it. After that, Chrissy gives Lynette a tour of her Murderabilia Museum, where she has a separate room that's dedicated to each of the final girls. And this is when Chrissy just starts going on and on about how she really felt like Lynette had never received a true initiation and how she looks forward to creating a shrine-like room with her. So even though Chrissy is batshit crazy, she makes a lot of valid points here. Like, she explains that when the monster kills someone, he's actually trying to kill parts of himself, but he can't ever kill that female side of himself. And at this point, all that's left is the final girl, which, because of this, we have birth and murder, life and death, male and female, the whole idea of creation and destruction, and they're essentially two parts of the same being, like yin and yang.
My favorite scene was when Danny beat the crap out of Stephanie at Camp Red Lake. Now, before this happened, Lynette and Stephanie go to Danny's ranch, and that's where Lynette explains that Sky was the mastermind behind everything. Even worse, Sky's with the rest of the final girls, but she doesn't know where. So when Danny explains that they're all at Camp Red Lake, they get in the truck and rush off to save them. But after they arrive, Danny steps out to take a look around, and that's when Stephanie shoots Lynette in the head, because Stephanie is actually Sky's partner in crime. When Danny comes back to the truck, that's when Stephanie hits Danny with the truck and throws her into a tree. And when Stephanie gets out to make sure she killed Lynette, Danny creeps out behind her and grabs the shotgun and cracks Stephanie in the face. Then they scuffle for a little bit, and Stephanie grabs the gun again, and Danny runs off into the woods before Stephanie can shoot her. I really like this moment because even after Danny was hit by a truck and thrown into a tree, she still somehow managed to get up and get a few good blows in on Stephanie. Which, unfortunately, it wasn't enough to kill her, but even after Stephanie got the gun and tried to kill Danny again, Danny was able to get away, thankfully, to safety. And all of that really made me realize that Danny is a total force to be reckoned with, both physically and mentally.
Also, when I spoke with Gina and Bryce, Gina explained her favorite moment was near the end when we were inside of the cabin and Lynette pulled the lever where we discovered that the whole place was like this bulletproof safety bunker. And that was like one of my favorite moments too, because I did not see that coming. But she really enjoyed it because she said it felt like what would happen if 007 was in the world of horror.
Yes.
So, yeah, I could see that. And she also mentioned that she enjoyed this because it felt like when all was lost, it proved that Lynette had your back. Now, Bryce said his favorite moment was near the end, where we got the summary of what happened to each final girl after they survived this ordeal. which I really do like that as well, because it felt like it was just wrapped up nicely in a little box and handed to us. And pretty much I really felt like we received a lot of closure. And he said the reason why he enjoyed this scene is because it felt poignant and beautiful. I honestly can't completely bitch about Chrissy because I actually kind of liked her.
I know.
And I know she was completely batshit crazy and nothing but a serial hag, but she really did enlighten the reader on the whole scenario of how the final girl worked.
Yeah.
But at the same time, she was really eccentric, and this is where I kind of liked her. Because when she thought that Lynette was finally going to be initiated into becoming a final girl, the way she reacted reminded me of how someone would gush over their BFF finally losing their virginity. Also, what I found to be really amusing was when Chrissy was getting all moist over the idea that she and Lynette were going to create a new room in her murderabilia museum. And I was like, Lynette, honey, listen, if you ever get out of this hellhole and Chrissy sends you a Facebook friend request, deny that shit at once.
The person I would like to gripe about today is Little Miss Stephanie. What can you say? There is so much bad you can say about Stephanie. I was not surprised at all, really, about the big reveal, because I had kind of had my suspicions about her all along. There was just something about her. Like, for example, she knew who Lynette was. That just stuck with me for some reason, because Lynette, compared to the other final girls, she was kind of small potatoes. But she knew who she was.
Yes.
She went with her willingly, without question, she didn't put up a fight, nothing. She just went. She just went with her. And there's things about her demeanor throughout the whole book. And also, what really got it with me, when Chrissy called her out. Y'all, for real, Stephanie is such an awful character, awful person. I guess what really irks me the most about her is how she lied about everything. She helped orchestrate all of this just because she wanted to be in the spotlight and be a final girl. That is such a slap in the face to actual victims of real trauma, And also, her betrayal of Lynette was really messed up. Like, she knew that Lynette was genuinely trying to help her and save her life. And what does she do? She seeks her equally psycho boyfriend on her. That's what. Stephanie just needs to be locked up forever.
I have some problems with Dr. Carroll. First of all, I don't really understand how you can be a literal doctor and not know how to set up your own emails. I just feel like if you would have taken a little bit of initiative to understand basic technology, then all of this could have potentially been avoided. Also, I do feel like there's some truth to what Lynette had to say about Dr. Carroll in the sense of her being opportunistic and manipulative.
Right.
I'm not saying she had a hand in the murders, at least not directly, but I do think that her intentions weren't totally altruistic, and she definitely wasn't a saint.
The Final Girl support group was a great suspense whodunit that paid homage to the slasher subgenre. And while we're giving a fun scenario where all of our favorite final girls come together, we also have some great character development, and the book does comment on quite a few important topics. Like, we have where it comments on sisterhood, PTSD, forgiveness, breaking the cycle, whitewashing, never giving up, and capitalism. Aside from all of that, Fine was actually a very important character, even though he was simply a plant. As I said, the character development in this book was awesome, which, of course, with it being Grady Hendrix, you can't expect anything less. But on top of that, the lead characters were inspired by actual classic final girls. Like, we have Julia Campbell, who was inspired by the Nev Campbell character in Scream. We have Danny, who was inspired by Danielle Harris in Halloween 4 and 5, even though her character really followed the plot line of Halloween Part 1 and 2. We also had Heather, who was inspired by Heather Langenkamp's character in A Nightmare on Elm Street. And we have my personal favorite, who was Adrian, and she was inspired by the Adrian King character from Friday the 13th. Now, I absolutely loved Adrian because she was so kick ass. Like, she created a wellness retreat for the final girls, and she busted up in Hollywood because not only were they whitewashing her story where they had turned her character into a white character when in real life she had been black, but she owned their money-grubbing asses, continued on with the franchise, then used that money for good. So, in my humble opinion, Adrian was a powerhouse badass who had the industry by the balls, and she literally became America's sweetheart for it.
Like Gina, my favorite character was Lynette, which is basically Linnea Quigley's character in Silent Night, Deadly Night had she lived. Which Gina says that she likes Lynette because she is batshit crazy, she has a can-do attitude, and she isn't afraid to admit when she's made mistakes. And honestly, whenever I started reading, I didn't really like Lynette. I felt like she was so anxiety-ridden and paranoid that she could come across as cold and cruel. But the longer I read and the more I saw what she went through and how she grew as a person, it really changed how I viewed her for the better.
Like Bryce, my favorite character is Marilyn, who was a Marilyn Burns character in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Just her southern sass and feistiness just spoke to me. But what really did it is the love and compassion she showed Michelle. She had such grace and love with her. Marilyn just has such layers to her.
She does.
She truly has a heart of gold, and just her willingness to help not only people but animals and plants as well.
Yeah.
Theme-wise, this book comments on sisterhood, which, no matter how different these women might be in their personal life or how greatly they piss each other off, they have all agreed to stand by each other and defend one another against their monsters. Which this subject gets pushed to the limit quite a bit, especially when it comes down to Lynette.
Right? Now, the ending of the book really just showcased the bond of sisterhood. Now, we got tested a few times over the few days, and I was broke apart due to others trying to break apart the group, which I cannot say due to can't reveal spoilers, but it really just comes to show you really can't jump to conclusions until you hear the other person's side of the story.
It does seem like Lynette did betray their trust, but she was stuck between a rock and a hard place. If it was me, I would have just ridden myself entirely of the work that was held against me.
Another subject that I noticed was PTSD, especially when it came down to Lynette.
Definitely Lynette.
Yeah, and because of everything she had been through when she was a teenager, like, this really gave her a lot of issues.
It did.
But what really tripped me out was when she had been arrested and we saw how the police were using Christmas memorabilia to really affect her mentally. And because we have the first-person perspective from Lynette, we see how their cruelty becomes like this claustrophobic insanity that really triggers her.
Yeah, Lynette was so affected by what happened to her as a teen that she became agoraphobic. Like, the first thing she does whenever she's in a new place is she looks for all the escape exits. And she remains hypervigilant all the time. Another thing is she becomes observant of the shoes people are wearing, and she's always checking out children's artwork to see if they're going to become a future serial killer or not. So paranoia really does play a part in this as well.
Speaking of PTSD, I found it really cool how Hendrix added that extra layer to Marilyn. Since she had gone through a Texas Chainsaw Massacre scenario, he notes that she would never let leather touch her skin. Also, because she was treated like an animal in a slaughterhouse, he says that she became vegan and fought for animal rights.
Next up is the subject of forgiveness, which along with this comes the topic of breaking the cycle of violence.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in regards to forgiveness, we see how this comes up quite a few times for Lynette and the other final girls.
Mm-hmm.
And even though they never really speak this aloud, the actions of the final girls speak louder than words.
Especially with the outcome, which we can't talk too much about, but with the ending, it really shows how forgiveness can help an abuser maybe change or at least find some peace.
Yeah, and this is when the topic of breaking the cycle of violence comes into play.
Mm-hmm.
Because even before Lynette knew exactly what was going on, Stephanie was urging they kill the mastermind before this happens again. And this was what made
Mm-hmm.
Lynette really adamant about stopping the snake from eating its tail.
Right.
Like with what Hendrix said in an interview, the final girl might not be the smartest or the strongest,
Mm-hmm.
but she has survived because she refuses to give up.
Right, and looking at the final girls in this light really teaches us to never give up and do whatever you can to save yourself and to attempt to save others, like what happened with Julia.
Yeah, and this is seen by how Lynette refuses to give up at the end, and how determined she is to warn the other final girls, despite how at this point they had all shunned her.
And the last topic that we noticed was the whole idea of male manipulation,
Mm-hmm.
which we really can't elaborate on this due to spoilers, but it is a very strong topic. And even at one point, one of the characters feels like she has some type of Stockholm syndrome where she starts to advocate for the monsters and she willingly lives with one. Aside from themes, I really felt like Fine stood as an important metaphor for growth.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was really cool to see how Fine went from point A to B. Like, at first, he was nothing more than a potted plant that served as Lynette's truest friend and a source of support, but eventually, Fine was able to plant his roots and Lynette spread her wings.
Yeah, in a way, Lynette to Fine was like Wilson to Tom Hanks. And because we had Lynette's insight on Fine and we saw the level of comfort he gave her, it really made everything more emotional.
Overall, the final girl support group didn't scare me, creep me out, or gross me out. But I absolutely love the characters, the scenario was original, and I love the whodunit aspect.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I can't say there were any moments that made my heart race, and the only creepy moments were whenever Lynette met Chrissy and they were going through the different rooms in her museum.
Yeah, it didn't gross me out, creep me out, or scare me or anything, but it did keep me on the edge of my seat the entire time.
The Final Girl Support Group by Grady Hendrix was a fun read with a lot of heart.
Mm-hmm.
And if you like to coordinate what you read with a specific time of year, you need to read this book at once. Because even though we don't have a Halloween sequence, it does mention near the beginning of the book that Halloween isn't far away. And yes, I do highly recommend this book.
I also recommend the book 100%. I absolutely loved it. And I wish that there would be a sequel or at least a spinoff between Heather and the Dream King.
Mm-hmm.
I also really loved the pacing of the book. It was really fast,
Mm-hmm.
but there were no dull moments or anything. And the characters were really fleshed out and three dimensional.
I really, really love this book and I highly recommend it. Since I really like slasher films, this book really spoke to me. I mean, it has everything a reader could want. I mean, it has sisterhood, it has betrayal, suspense, twists and turns. It has great characters and hilarious dialogue. I mean, if you really like horror books and you really like a good slasher film, this book is for you.
On to the questions. First off, what is a slasher book that you would recommend? Also, who is your favorite final girl? Personally, I would have to say Nancy from A Nightmare on Elm Street because she was really badass and she had a lot of heart.
Right.
Like, not only did she go after Freddy Krueger, but she created all of these really awesome booby traps. Then, in a sequel, she returned as a therapist to try to help kids who had the same issues as herself.
Mm-hmm.
So, she paid it forward pretty good.
Laurie from Halloween is my favorite final girl. Halloween and Jamie Lee Curtis have always held such a special place for me, and the movie itself checks all my boxes, and Laurie is such a good character. I mean, she is strong, resilient, loving, and innocent, all rolled in one, and fiercely protective of the kids in her care.
I've always loved Sydney from the Scream movies. She was always careful, clever, and tough. And no
Mm-hmm.
matter who the killer was, she was always one step ahead. And when it really came down to it, she wasn't afraid to pull the trigger and make sure that her killer was really dead.
So that was our review for the Final Girl Support Group, and we hope you enjoyed it. This was totally an experience having two guests because we had a lot of fun.
Yes,
and
we did.
We know there was a lot of continuity errors. We know cats appeared, and we know that Michael Myers went from everywhere. So we just hope you enjoyed it and found humor in it.
Mm-hmm.
And I would like to say thank you for coming back onto the show, Connie. It was great to have you.
Thank you for having me back. I had so much fun.
And thank you for coming on to the show, Kerry.
Of course.
So, of course, they might not see you again before Halloween, but I totally will. So
Happy Halloween!
There
Happy
we go. And definitely be sure to check this book out before Halloween because it does totally help get you in the spirit of things.
It does.
Now that it's time to close out this episode, I would like to give a shout out to these wonderful people. Here's a list of my Patreon contributors, and as you can see, some of them are creators, so be sure to check out their work. And if you would like to be included with this list, just go to the description section of this episode and you'll see that I have a link available for my Patreon account. And for $5 a month, I'll give you a shout out at the end of my videos. If you have a specific profession you would like to have tied to your name, just let me know and I will gladly include that with your shout out. Also, I do have a $10 tier available where you will receive that same shout out, but I do creepy photography on the side. So at the beginning of every month, I'll send you over a creepy photo, and after you receive it, you can print it off, do whatever you like. But if you are not able to contribute to my Patreon, no sweat. All I hope is that you return to this channel so we can continue to have a good time together. Also, if you would like to follow me on social media, links to my Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok are all available in the description section of this video. And if you have not subscribed to this channel, be sure to subscribe and click that notifications bell because I have more book reviews coming in the near future. So until we see each other again, I hope you have a great week and sweet nightmares.